Hey guys, Zor here from ZorGameGeek.com, here today to talk to you about the Savage Worlds role-playing game setting of Deadlands. If you missed it, Deadlands just had a successful Kickstarter to reboot and update the Deadlands setting for the current edition of the Savage Worlds role-playing game called the Adventures Edition, or SWADE, Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. I have a pre-release copy, a PDF copy of the Deadlands rules, and they are updating them, and I've had 2 releases to go through, and I published my article reviewing the Deadlands book, the latest edition of it, and you can find that at zorgamegeek.com/Deadlands. I want to talk to you about one of the changes with the current edition of Deadlands, and I'm really glad they've made this change. This takes some context because you have to understand how things were in the prior editions of Deadlands. Deadlands is set in the 1870s, 1880s, post-Civil War America. And it is basically taking this premise that history is what it is until the mid-1860s when magic re-enters the world, evil magic re-enters the world, and greatly changes and disrupts the natural order. Now, in the prior versions of Deadlands, that resulted in, amongst other things, the stalemate of the Civil War, where they get to the point where the two sides, the North and the South, essentially declare peace. They declare a stop in the fighting, and they agree to exist as 2 independent nations. Now, in that power vacuum out in the plains, we have a change in that the Sioux Indians declare their own nation in the Dakotas and eastern Montana, eastern Wyoming area. And then there is the Coyote Federation in what is essentially eastern Oklahoma, also as a Native American nation. Out in the Great Salt Lake, you have the Mormons declaring an independent nation, the nation of Deseret, or Desiree, I don't know how to pronounce that. And then California, which is rocked by a great earthquake and tore up the city of Los Angeles, declares itself essentially as a city-state. And so we have this world in which you have the Confederate South and North America existing peaceably with this ongoing Cold War as they're shooting, not literally shooting, but sometimes, as they're heading west to try to get the Pacific and get across the nation and then deal with that territory in between. The problem with that setting is it has this weird conceit where it says that slavery is no more. Now, I'm recording this during the protests following the George Floyd death. And this is a sensitive topic for some and not a sensitive topic for others. And I'm leaning into the not a sensitive topic because this old timeline of the prior versions of Deadlands is just plain wrong. What they posit is that the South did away with slavery during the Civil War because they were kind of losing in the 1860s, mid-1860s, and so they decided that they would give slaves an offer of, if they signed up for military service, they would give them their freedom. And then eventually they abolished slavery. That caused the British to join the South, and then that's what led to the stalemate. Poppycock. There is in no conceivable universe where slavery is the cornerstone of the Confederate South. Again, slavery is the cornerstone of the South. That is what they were fighting for, okay? There is no lost cause. There is no states' rights. The cornerstone of the Confederacy was slavery. And we know from actual history, when the Union gave freed slaves weapons and allowed them to enlist and had black regiments that fought, that the Southern soldiers went into this berserk rage when they saw these African-American soldiers with rifles shooting at them. And their bloodlust went out of control, and they tried to savage. They took pleasure in killing these freed slaves who were fighting back. I can't imagine, even in a fictional world where there's magic and undead and all of that, that the Southern troops would have ever permitted or allowed for former slaves to fight alongside them. And that little facade creation to try to get around slavery when you have a setting with the Confederate States of America just rings hollow. Luckily, the current version of Deadlands gets rid of that. In the current version of Deadlands, and they have this little conceit where there's some sort of magical thing happen and the timeline shifted, and that's how they're rewriting history, their own fictional history in canon, that the North does eventually win the Civil War. It happens almost 5 years later than in our timeline, 1871, but they win and the South capitulates and slavery is abolished as in our timeline. And so while there's prejudice, while there is all of the problems that having centuries of slavery created, those problems we're still experiencing today, it at least has a more realistic and palatable abolition of slavery. The South was defeated, the cornerstone of the Confederacy was cracked and taken away from them, and now we're dealing with a world where African Americans can vote, and we are dealing with a time period where Reconstruction is, for the time being at least, alive and well. And for that, this new book, this new Deadlands book, starts in a much better place, a much more palatable place, and a much more gameable space than in the prior editions. If you want to read more about my review of the new Deadlands setting book, go to zorgamegeek.com/Deadlands. Again, that is zorgamegeek.com/Deadlands. Keep gaming.